Podcast Talk.
Learn English naturally.
Why we're always busy but never productive.
Most people think they're busy because they're productive. But the truth is, being busy is often a way to avoid real work.
Yeah, you answer emails, check messages, jump between tasks all day, and at the end, nothing important is actually finished.
And what's interesting is that English has very specific ways to talk about this feeling. When you're exhausted, busy, but still stuck.
Today, we're breaking down how people really talk about being busy and why it often sounds normal but means something deeper.
And if you like real conversations like this, not textbook English, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow.
So let's start with something simple. Maya, have you noticed how people love saying, "I'm busy," instead of saying what they're actually feeling?
All the time. Busy sounds responsible. It sounds important. But very often it hides confusion, pressure, or even fear.
Exactly. Saying, "I'm overwhelmed," feels vulnerable. Saying, "I don't know what to focus on," feels risky. So people choose the safe word, busy.
And when you understand this, English stops being just words. You start hearing emotions behind simple phrases.
Let's talk about how this sounds in real conversations, then at work, with friends, and even with ourselves.
I noticed this in my own life. There were days when I felt exhausted, but when I tried to explain why, nothing concrete came to mind. No big tasks, no huge problems, just constant motion without direction.
I know that feeling. It's like your calendar is full, your head is full, but your sense of progress is empty. You're doing a lot, but moving nowhere.
And in English, people rarely say, I feel lost. They say things like, I've just been really busy lately, and everyone nods like that explains everything.
Yeah, because being busy sounds normal, it sounds acceptable. No one questions it. No one asks what you're avoiding or what you're afraid to stop and think about.
I started noticing that I stayed busy mostly when I didn't want to slow down. Because slowing down meant asking myself uncomfortable questions. Am I actually doing what matters? Am I choosing these tasks or just reacting to everything around me? Being busy felt safer than facing those answers.
I relate to that a lot, Maya. Whenever I tell people I'm busy, it often means avoiding making a decision. It's easier to answer emails and messages than to stop and think about what actually deserves my attention. Busy keeps me moving, even when I'm not moving forward.
And that's why the word busy sounds so normal in English. It doesn't raise questions. People rarely ask what kind of busy you are or whether that busyness is helping you or draining you. It sounds responsible, even when it hides confusion.
I think that's why conversations about productivity often feel shallow. They focus on schedules, apps, and routines, but not on direction. You can organize your time perfectly and still feel lost if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing.
I've noticed that people rarely say, I don't feel fulfilled. They say, I'm just really busy right now. And because everyone understands busyness, no one looks deeper. The conversation ends there.
Once you hear this pattern, English changes for you. You stop hearing busy as a fact and start hearing it as a signal of pressure, avoidance, or lack of clarity. And that awareness makes conversations feel more real.
Yes, exactly. Busy sounds like an explanation, but it's really a shortcut. It saves us from saying, I feel overwhelmed, or I'm tired of reacting instead of choosing. And in real life, Maya and Ethan included, we use it because it protects us. It keeps things polite and surface level, even when something deeper is going on.
I remember a moment at work when someone asked me if I had time for a new project. I said, "I'm pretty busy." even though what I really meant was, I don't know if I want to keep saying yes. Busy sounded safer than admitting uncertainty. And English gives us these safe phrases that hide hesitation really well.
That's such a common situation. And what's interesting is that native speakers hear more than the words. When someone says, I'm swamped or I've been slammed, it often signals pressure, not productivity. It's not pride. It's a quiet request for space.
And this is why understanding real English matters. If you only translate words, you miss the message. But when you understand context, tone, and habits, new conversations become clearer. You stop pushing people when they're overwhelmed, and you stop blaming yourself when someone pulls away.
And that understanding changes how you speak too. You choose words more honestly. You might still say, I'm busy, but now you know what you're really saying and what you're not. That awareness alone makes English sound more natural and human.
Something else I've noticed, Maya, is how often being busy becomes part of someone's identity. People don't just say they're busy, say bahar, they say it with pride, like it proves they matter, like it proves they're needed. And in conversations, that changes the tone. Busy stops being a temporary state and starts sounding permanent.
Yes, and once it becomes permanent, it becomes heavy because if you're always busy, there's no room to rest without guilt. I've heard people apologize for relaxing, like they're doing something wrong. English reflects that mindset really clearly.
Exactly. Phrases like, I should be doing something or I can't relax show up everywhere. Even when nothing urgent exists, people feel pressure. And when pressure becomes normal, productivity actually drops.
I've noticed that the most productive people I know don't sound busy. They sound calm. Their English is slower, clearer, less rushed. And that tells you something important about how productivity actually feels.
That's such a good point. Real productivity feels quiet. And once you hear that difference in English, you stop chasing busyness and start listening for clarity.
I remember a weekend when I promised myself I would rest. No plans, no deadlines. But the whole time, my mind kept whispering, you should be doing something useful. And that pressure didn't come from work. It came from the habit of always being busy.
I've had that too, Maya. Even when nothing urgent exists, the body stays tense. And in English, people often describe this by saying, I can't switch off. It sounds casual, but it hides exhaustion.
That phrase says a lot, actually. I can't switch off doesn't mean someone loves working. It means their mind hasn't learned how to stop reacting. And that constant reaction creates the feeling of busyness.
What's interesting is that people rarely call this stress. They normalize it. They say things like, that's just how life is. And English makes that sound reasonable even when it's slowly draining them.
When you hear these phrases often enough, you start using them yourself. And over time, being busy stops feeling temporary. It becomes your default state.
And that's where productivity quietly breaks down, because when everything feels urgent, nothing feels meaningful. English reflects this confusion really clearly.
I've noticed that when people feel truly productive, they don't talk much about being busy. They talk about progress, about finishing something. Their language changes.
Yes, and they use calmer verbs. I focused. I finished. I decided. Those words sound grounded. Busy language sounds rushed.
Once you start hearing that difference, you can't unhear it. Conversations feel clearer and you stop confusing movement with meaning.
And that awareness is what slowly shifts people from busy to productive. Not force, not pressure, just clarity.
Ethan, have you noticed how people describe their days when they feel constantly busy? They list tasks, meetings, messages, calls. But when you ask what actually mattered that day, there's often a long pause. Oh, because activity filled the time, not meaning. And in English, this shows up clearly in how people speak fast, fragmented, jumping from one thing to another without finishing a thought.
Yes, and that pause tells you everything. It's the moment people realize they were moving all day without direction. I've been there myself. I finished the day tired, but when I tried to explain why, I couldn't point to a single meaningful result. That's when busy turns into frustration.
And the frustrating part is that society often rewards this. When you say you're busy, people assume you're important. They don't ask if you're fulfilled. They don't ask if you're focused. English has made busy sound like success, even when it's just noise.
That's why people defend their busyness so strongly. Because letting go of it feels like losing value. If I'm not busy, who am I? And English expressions reflect that fear. I can't slow down, I don't have time. Things are crazy right now. All of them keep motion going.
But real productivity feels different. It feels quieter. It gives you fewer things to say, not more. And once you notice that difference in how people speak English, you start hearing clarity instead of chaos.
Maya, something else I've noticed is how people measure their days. They don't ask, did I move forward? They ask, was I busy enough? And then when busyness becomes the metric, clarity disappears. You can fill every hour and still feel strangely unsatisfied because activity alone doesn't tell you if your effort mattered.
That's true. I have caught myself feeling proud of being exhausted. Like tiredness itself proved I had done something meaningful. But exhaustion doesn't equal progress. Sometimes it just means we didn't pause long enough to choose wisely.
And English mirrors that confusion. People say, I'm drained, I'm wiped, I'm running on empty. Those phrases sound casual, but they're signals. Signals that effort has been high, but direction hasn't.
When you start hearing those signals, conversations change. You don't respond with advice. You respond with understanding. And that shift alone can make communication feel lighter.
I think that's why productivity advice often fails. It treats people like machines. But real productivity depends on attention, energy, and intention, not just time.
I realize something important about my own routine. The days when I feel the most busy are usually the days when I haven't decided what actually matters. I react to emails, messages, small requests, little interruptions. And by the evening, I'm exhausted. But I can't point to one thing that moved my life forward. That kind of busyness doesn't feel productive, it feels empty.
I've had the same experience, Maya, and what surprised me is how normal that sounds in English. People describe entire weeks like this and don't even question it. They say, I've been insanely busy and everyone understands. No one asks what actually changed or improved.
And that's where English becomes really interesting. Because the language doesn't judge busyness, it accepts it, which means you can stay busy for years without ever having to explain why. The words protect you from deeper questions.
That protection feels comfortable at first, but over time it creates distance from yourself and from others. Conversations stay polite but shallow. You talk about being busy instead of talking about being stuck. unsure, or overwhelmed.
When you finally hear that difference, something shifts. You stop using busy as a default answer. You start choosing words that reflect reality, not pressure. And that's when in English starts working for you, and not as noise, but as clarity.
You're right, Maya, and I think that's the moment many people miss. They believe being busy is just a phase, something temporary. But months pass, then years, and busy becomes their normal state. And what's dangerous is that it stops feeling wrong. English makes it easy to stay there because the language never forces you to explain what all that effort is actually for.
Yes, and when that happens, people stop checking in with themselves. They don't ask if they're growing or just surviving. I've seen friends who are constantly busy, but emotionally exhausted and disconnected. And when they describe their lives in English, it all sounds fine on the surface, even when it really isn't.
That's because English is very good at smoothing things out. Phrases like I'm managing or I'm getting by sound stable, but they often hide low energy and quiet frustration. If you don't listen carefully, you miss what the speaker is really saying.
And that's why learning real English isn't just about vocabulary. It's about learning to hear discomfort, hesitation, and emotional signals. Once you hear those, conversations stop feeling shallow. They start feeling human.
And that awareness also changes how you speak about your own life. You don't hide behind busy anymore. You choose words that reflect how you actually feel. And that honesty makes communication clearer and lighter.
Ethan, something changed for me when I stopped measuring my day by how full it was. I started asking a quieter question. Did I make one clear decision today? When the answer was yes, the day felt lighter, even if I did less. That's when busy stopped feeling impressive and started feeling optional.
I like that framing, Maya. Decisions create direction. Without them, effort just spreads everywhere. I notice that when I decide early what matters, the rest of the noise loses power. English reflects this shift too. My words slow down when my focus is clear.
And slowing down doesn't mean falling behind. That's a fear many people have. But in reality, slowing down helps you see what's unnecessary. And once you remove that, progress actually speeds up in a calmer way.
This is exactly where many people get confused, Maya. They think productivity is about speed and volume. More tasks, more movement, more visible effort. But real productivity feels very different. It feels intentional. It feels focused. And in English, you can actually hear this difference. Busy language sounds rushed and scattered. Productive language sounds slower, clearer, and more deliberate. When someone knows what matters, they don't need many words to prove it.
You know, Ethan, once I started paying attention to how productive people actually speak, everything clicked. They don't sound rushed. They don't sound apologetic for resting. They choose their words carefully, and that calmness signals confidence. In contrast, when someone is constantly busy, their language feels defensive, like they're trying to justify their time instead of owning it.
That's such an important distinction, Maya. When someone owns their priorities, they don't need to prove how busy they are. Their English becomes simpler, clearer, and more direct. And that simplicity is memorable. People remember clarity. They don't remember chaos.
If this conversation made you rethink what being productive really means, stay with us. Share in the comments how busyness shows up in your life. And let's keep learning real English through real conversations together.
And one last thought before we end, Maya. Productivity isn't something you prove to others. It's something you feel internally. When your actions align with what matters to you, there's less noise, less pressure, and fewer excuses. English reflects that inner alignment clearly. You stop explaining yourself so much. And the less you explain, the more confident you sound. Not because you're busy, but because you're clear.